Feedback. Feedback. Hi, this is Theo Broughton.
And I am Thabiti Mpinga.
Inviting you to join us each Monday at 9 a.m. for Feedback,
A positive image production by Hood Research.
Encourage others to tune in each Monday on
Comcast Detroit, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, watch WHPR TV Network anywhere.
And take us along with you. Feedback, feedback, feedback.
Welcome to Feedback, a Hood Research production, and I am Professor Michael Griggs stepping in for Theo Broughton and Thabiti. Feel free to call in. Today we're going to deal with Black history. What I wanted to focus on is not the traditional approach of looking at Black history. I want us to look at a lot of those scholars that made Black history as popular as it is today. The W.E. Du Boises, the E. Franklin Frazier's, the Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinans, Amos Wilson, Dr. John Henry Clark, George G.M. James, and others. Some names we might be familiar with, other ones we might not know. Some of you do know who W.E. Du Bois was. He was one of our most brilliant intellects we've ever had. W.E. Du Bois published over 4,000 articles and books as it relates to black folks. He was the first black person to get his PhD from Harvard University. He was a sociologist, a brilliant person who influenced many of us and many of the scholars who came after him. W.E. Du Bois spent thousands upon thousands of hours trying to correct the historical record. Because as you know, many people at that time were miseducated about the history of black people. A lot of us was operating off stereotypes. We were misinformed. A lot of racist historians and stereotypes connected to who we were and from whence we came. Dr. Du Bois spent thousands of hours. He taught himself German. He learned how to speak German so he could go back and trace some of the primary documents so he can read and understand them firsthand instead of having to go through some of the racist historians at the time who, like I mentioned, poorly portrayed black folks. And black history is not just a celebration of our contributions. It's a celebration of who we are, and it helps to correct the historical record. As you guys know, some of you know that I teach at Wayne County Community College, and I'm in the African American Studies program, and I'm in the history department as well. So I teach everything from black psychology to black politics. I teach African American History 1 and African American History 2. I teach American History 1 and American History 2. I teach ancient history as well. And oftentimes I get more pushback when I'm teaching those black classes that deal with us, because collectively a lot of us have been taught that we are unimportant. So some of my students convey to me that when they tell people they're taking a class about themselves, they often hear from people from our community, why are you taking that class? For what reason? You know, what are you going to do with that? So we get questioned about being interested in ourselves. And when some of my students tell me, when they mention some of the things that they learn in that class, they often get pushed back where people would say, there you go with that black stuff. Now, never will you hear us ever push back against a Chinese person and say, there you go with that Chinese stuff. Or the Arab person, there you go with that Arab stuff. But to be black and to be an advocate for black history and our blackness, we have been collectively miseducated, where that's abnormal today in our community. So, you know, we have this month that was designated by Carter G. Woodson, who was the second black person to get his PhD from Harvard. And he has a popular book called The Miseducation of the Negro. And I think it was mentioned last week by Brother Michael Imhotep, the reason that February was designated. It was because of the birthday of Abraham Lincoln was in February, and Frederick Douglass, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Frederick Douglass, we don't know when his birthday actually was, but one of the few memories he had of his mother is that she always called him her little Valentine. So based on that memory, he designated his birthday on Valentine's Day. Most slaves at that point did not know when their birthday was. Whites tried to keep us as ignorant as humanly possible, so it was rare when you read some of the slave narratives where a slave knew when their birthday was. So Carter G. Woodson, who was another gift to our family, he is considered by many as the father of education. And he too publishes that book, The Miseducation of a Negro, as well as others. He was the educator. Du Bois was a sociologist. Another preeminent sociologist was E. Franklin Frazier. He was a sociologist, and ironically, he was the first black person named to the American Sociology Association in 1948, early on, and he has a lot of classical pieces that he published. One was The Negro Family. Another one that really shook people up was the Black Bourgeoisie. He published that in 1957. A very prolific, outstanding sociologist that influenced, again, many folks. So the Black Bourgeoisie was a book that looked at the emerging middle class black family. And some of the westernized ways in which the black middle class adopted. And he looked at some of those things as being detrimental to the rest of us. It's where Malcolm got the house Negro and field Negro from, that concept, by reading E. Franklin Frazier's Black Bourgeoisie, that looked at everything from the attitudes adopted from our ascendants from working poor to middle class, the doctors and the lawyers, and how a lot of them became co-opted. They really embraced a lot of the Western value system. And then they began to occupy spaces of leadership and power where, to a great extent, they became a micro the macro. They imitated in many ways the same behaviors that afflicted black people by white people. So he talked about this. Upon his death, he was lauded by the Nation of Islam and their newspaper because they really liked the way he pointed out some of the misguided leadership we had, some of what we considered some of the Uncle Toms that we had, and some of the behaviorisms that he drew a direct link from white America to this black emerging bourgeoisie class. Now, many times lay folks look at the bourgeoisie and the black middle class and they think strictly Uncle Tom or house Negro as Uncle Tom. But you got to keep in mind that was some of the typical behavior that you would get from a lot of the house Negroes or the bourgeoisie. But oftentimes in our history, it was that very class of folks who were the leaders and spearheaded movements, the Dr. Martin Luther Kings and the Dr. Huey Newtons and the Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, and some of these people who occupied some of these privileged spaces, this black bourgeoisie. Toussaint Overture, who started the rebellion and revolution over in Haiti, he was a house Negro. So all house Negroes were not as bad as we like to think. But I do understand the stereotypes connected to it, and typically it was the behavior of most house Negroes because people had a vested interest in these privileges in the space that they occupied. So even W.E. Du Bois himself had to rescind his notion of the talented tenth. And for those who don't know what the talented tenth is, where he recommended, or his position was, that those who knew the most and were educated and things of that nature should be those people making the decisions for the majority of black people. But he rescinded that when the government was trying to deport him and kick him out of the country. And he realized at that moment that it was the working class people who came to aid him and defend him and fight for him, that a lot of the black middle class and people who were deeply entrenched in this society did not want to lose the perks that came with that status, that came with that position. So he rescinded that and saw that some of the working class folks were best suited to articulate their own issues and confront and tackle their own problems, because they were dealing with it day to day. And a lot of folks who occupied those bourgeoisie spaces were too invested and didn't want to lose the perks and stuff that came with it, the livelihood and the power, some of the petty power positions that came with it. So again, Du Bois, the sociologist, E. Franklin Frazier, the sociologist, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the quote-unquote father of education for us. These were some of the contributors that help us appreciate this celebration we call Black History. You had psychologists as well. You had Amos Wilson, Francis Cress Welsing, you have Wade Nobles, you have Dr. Naim Akbar, you have Frantz Fanon from Algeria, and Dr. Alvin Poussant, you have Dr. Kenneth Clark. These are some of the names that some of us know. But keep in mind, these scholars were the very foundation of why we celebrate, and we know what we know about black history, about black culture, about black psychology, about black sociology. These are the unsung folks who put in countless hours, many of which got death threats. It's rumored that Dr. George G.M. James, who wrote the book Stolen Legacy, he put a book out in 1954. Keep in mind the time frame, 1954. And this book was about how the Greeks stole the ideas of philosophy and culture and religion and things from Africa, specifically Egypt. And again, he put this out in 1954. You know, this before the bus boycott. He was a instructor in Arkansas. So he put this book out at a time, really many would say the height of Jim Crow, where people were trying to push us back in our place, where folks were trying to get us to believe that we were inferior and we made no contributions to this world. They found George G.M. James, it's rumored, they found him murdered with his throat slit shortly after the publication of his book. So we had scholars who, many of which dealt with death threats, cars were bombed, some were killed, and again, it's still because of them that we know this history. It's because of them we know these kings, Akhenaten and King Tut. It's because of these folks' sacrifices and their denial to believe that we were the things that Europeans said we were. They pushed back. And not only did they push back, but they put in the work, and they did the research, and they put out the scholarship. A lot of them used their own funds. Folks would not publish books to the contrary of Western superiority. Most were maligned. People lost their jobs. Francis Cress Welsing, she got relieved from, I believe it was it Howard or Morehouse where she was working, talking about white supremacy, challenging the notion of white superiority. And again, you know, there are many, but I see we have some callers, so I'm going to go to one of the callers, and then we'll proceed. Hello, caller, can you hear me? Hello, caller? Okay, I'm new at this, so So hopefully I'll try again in a second. I see some of the lines people are calling. But there were some other names that I mentioned, like Amos Wilson, who many consider is arguably our best psychologist that we have produced. He has produced some phenomenal works. Started off in the early 70s with the developmental psychology of the black child, which was groundbreaking. And it looked at how black children develop, how they have tremendous psychomotor skills that's unparalleled to other children. He looked at the Bailey Scales studies and the Jeber studies, where people tested children from birth up until around 15, 16 months of age. And they saw that the black child scored significantly higher on all of these 60 different things over and beyond other children. We were walking before other children. We were climbing steps before other children. We were examining ourselves, going to the mirror, looking at ourselves before other children. Our palates and our mouths developed earlier than other children. We're eating solid foods before other children. He put this out in the 70s. He also put out another groundbreaking book called Black on Black Violence in Service of White Domination. So he looked at the internalized racism, the ideas that a lot of us began to embrace after integration, and how our communities went from a peaceful, loving communities where doors were left unlocked to a community where homicide rates after integration began to be so pervasive that they called that generation the endangered species, and gangs began to ravage our communities. And this was some strange behavior that Black America have never witnessed since after slavery up until about 1960, 1970. We began to see gangs and things emerge from our community, and young people begin to practice some pathologies that were not seen prior to that time. So his work deals with that. In one book specifically, The Falsification of African Consciousness, looked at how our consciousness became falsified through the miseducation from Western culture, how we began to see more of ourselves through their eyes and less of ourselves through our mothers' and fathers' eyes. And based on that internalization of racism, we begin to act out and do those things that the stereotypes that was imposed upon us, we began to act out on those things. So he, too, was another person I highly recommend that you check him out. So I'm going to try this phone line again, and bear with me. I'm new to this. Hello, caller.
Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Hi, Dr. Griggs. Would you repeat that author's name again that you're alluding to?
Dr. Amos Wilson.
Dr. Amos Wilson. And the name of the book again, or the research?
The first one I mentioned was The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child.
Uh-huh.
And then I mentioned Black on Black Violence.
Okay.
And then the last one I mentioned was Falsification of African Consciousness.
Okay. Can you, I don't know what's in your purview today, but can you expound on that a little bit? Because I think that is very interesting, because I don't understand how our community has come to where it is now, where we're just disrespecting each other, like in the music. Okay, like the Grammys were on last night, and I really didn't watch them, but I just noticed our music, we denigrate our own women, and I don't notice any other races doing that, but black folks, calling the women B's and W's and all that in their songs and making sexual objects out of them. And also, just with our neighborhoods, the upkeep of our neighborhoods, it's just ridiculous how many of us will move into neighborhoods that are very stable and destabilize them on purpose almost, like that's supposed to be the way it is in the so-called hood, whatever that is, okay? But it seems to me like people want to normalize some of this destructive behavior. And I was just wondering, do your authors discuss that kind of thing in the books, or is that something that's still being researched?
No, they do discuss that. Especially Dr. Amos Wilson. He really dwells into that deeply, and you come away with a clear understanding of some of those dynamics that led us to do what we do. Let me share with you one additional author as well, Dr. Bobby Wright.
Bobby Wright?
Yeah, Dr. Bobby Wright.
Okay.
And Dr. Bobby Wright was a psychologist in the latter generation, and that generation prior to. So when the Civil Rights Movement was on the precipice, Dr. Bobby Wright, who was a psychologist, tried to warn Black America about what would happen if we decided to make that move. Dr. Bobby Wright told us that if we turn our children over to people who were spraying us with water hoses, that were sicking the dogs on Black people, that were bombing churches, he said that we would have children unlike any other children that we have ever witnessed before. And he coined a term called menticide, which means it would be the destruction of the Black mind. So at the time, most Black people at that time, you know, we controlled our children. We had orderly communities. We can sleep and leave the doors left unlocked. If it was hot outside, we can sleep on the porch and never had to worry about somebody doing anything. But Bobby Wright said that will change. But people couldn't see what he saw. He said that if you turn them over to people who don't like you and they educate your children will behave accordingly, like them. But again, this was far-fetched for the average person to even believe. And we forged ahead. And lo and behold, one generation after integration, we manifest those things that Bobby Wright warned us about. Because again, we were educated by other people. So we have a different behavior because we are one of the only groups that turn our children over, not just to other people, but to our historical adversaries and say, shape and mold our children's minds. And they have. And that's why we have the behavior that we have. The neighborhoods look like they do. Because to a great extent, if you fill a child up with love, what comes out of him is love. But if you fill a child up with hate, what comes out of that child is hate. So we see what's going on in the inside of our children by what we see in the neighborhoods around us.
So about how far back was he looking at? Because I noticed the demise of the Black community, as it were, probably in the early 70s. I started noticing it declining then. Okay.
Yes.
Now, maybe I'm wrong, but that's when I started to notice a
No,
difference
you're right.
in the way people were parenting their kids.
Uh-huh.
Because let's face it, everything goes back to home, okay,
Yeah.
regardless of who's teaching you in school or whatever. But somewhere along the line, the parents were not parenting. Everything was okay. Everything goes. You didn't have to be home at a certain time anymore. You didn't have to keep the house clean. You didn't have to eat food at the table, at the dinner table. You could walk down the street and eat. You know, all the stuff that I started noticing, the relaxing of rules. And are we saying that Dr. Bobby Wright is pretty much equating that to who was teaching us in school, or what was
correct.
the role of the parents?
Correct. He talked about that. See, a lot of times these psychologists and sociologists, when they see behavior that is going on all over America simultaneously, then you know it's systematic. It's not an individual exercise where one person wakes up and says, I'm going to do something completely different from my parents and my parents and my parents before me. So when you see it happening in the south side of Chicago and you see it happening in South Central and Detroit and New York, then it's something systematic that people had to be taught this collectively because it's bigger and broader than an individual exercise. So he saw this, and Malcolm X warned of this, and Zora Neale Hurston. You had other people who saw what would happen. And like you said, in the 70s, you know, the concept of integration started in 54. So in the 70s, you saw some of the things that you saw and some of our neighborhood declines all over America simultaneously. And that was roughly, you know, that generation after we began the process of integration. We adopted more of their ideas, and we became like a lot of the stereotypes that was imposed on us. We embraced more of that and began to act it out.
That's very interesting. I have to really read up on that, because I hope or I wonder, do they have any solutions to the cause of this problem? Because it has gotten out of control, in my opinion. Now it's just like completely out of control, and people accept it. And when you don't agree with it, they'll tell you, well, okay, you outgrew your neighborhood. You need to move along. And people feel like that, and then they start going out into the suburbs where they get abused and called the N-word, and people telling your kids are stupid in school, and you're all out in the woods with Bambi, and, you know, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You're out of your element when you really don't want to, but you feel uncomfortable living around this stuff because it's not, in my opinion, it's not normal to me to live like that.
I agree.
So, yeah, so I just hope that he gives some solutions or...
Yeah, they're in there. They're in there. And you know, and to our credit, let's say you do have pockets of people in our community that still have some of the old school values. But I do know that some areas represent some, you know, things that we've never seen before. But you do have communities, i.e., Palmer Woods or Sherwood Forest or University District or Green Acres or Virginia Park or New Center area and Indian Village and a host of other neighborhoods that remind us of yesterday. You know, a lot of people who are more cultured, more educated, and they tend to have some of the values of yesterday. But we do have those pockets that we
and that's educational and economical. But, like, you know, people who may be middle-income people who don't earn a lot or something, they are subjected to this deterioration of neighborhoods and the values around them because, let's face it, everybody can't afford to live in Palmer Woods.
Right,
or
no
something
doubt.
like that. But there are, you know, and I know you didn't mean to skip over some, but there are other ones that are intact.
Right. Russell Woods and other places. Yeah, some modest neighborhoods.
But it's up to the neighbors in the neighborhood to try to keep it intact.
Yeah.
But you do run into this adversarial attitude, and people will say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the hood, and that's the way we do it in the hood. We throw our chicken bones out, and we put our barbecue pits on the front porch and our pit bulls and basketball hoops. So what you talking about? What's wrong with you? Move if you don't like it, you know. So that attitude is very, very destructive, and it's the same thing with the music, blasting with all the curse words and little bitty kids and babies hearing that stuff all the time, and it's just very destructive, and it really is disturbing to me, you know, that kind of thing is going on in our culture, and hopefully, I don't know what we can do to turn it around. It might be too late. I don't know. I'm kind of concerned.
It's not too late. It's not too late. We're gonna win this.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for calling.
Thank you for the discourse.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Bye.
Bye-bye. Yes. So that was Amos Wilson. Where did I leave off? On the psychologists. But we have some historians who were extremely prolific. We have Dr. John Henry Clark, who was a giant. Dr. John Henry Clark was a historian, a playwright, a mentor to Malcolm. He was a giant. I recommend that if you can pick up any of his books. He wrote this one piece called The Boy Who Painted Christ Black, and it became so popular it was adopted to a short series on HBO where Wesley Snipes played the teacher of the boy who painted Christ black. And Wesley was so moved by the works of Dr. John Henry Clark that he produced a piece on Dr. John Henry Clark called A Long and Mighty Walk. And you guys can get that off of YouTube about Dr. John Henry Clark. Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen, who is my mentor. It's a person who I studied under for many years, from the late 80s up until he died a few years ago at his funeral. And Dr. Ben was a very unique intellect because of his background. He had a background in so many different areas. He had a PhD in Moorish history. He had a PhD in anthropology. He was an anthropologist. He had his engineering degree. He had a law degree. He was a lawyer. And he was an Egyptologist. He spoke multiple languages. And he has taken tens of thousands of people back to Africa to study. And he too was a mentor to Malcolm. You have to keep in mind that we love a lot of our leadership, but most of the leadership who conveyed this wonderful information, they were not the scholars, but they had to learn from the scholars. So Farrakhan, who brilliantly conveys this information, learned from the scholars. And Dr. Ben, prior to his death, donated his library of thousands of books to the Nation of Islam. I see we have some more callers. Hello, caller. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
I just want to say I just got in from my swimming gym, but I wanted to add that we are a great people, and we need to understand our greatness. We have children as young as 7 years old already on their way to universities. We have young women with children who have gotten 2 degrees. So there's so much greatness in us, but we spend a lot of time accessing the negative and not paying attention to the positive and the greatness that's there within us. Your class has definitely brought me more and more, and I'm starting to try to dwell more on the positive energies and the people that we are and our capabilities if we only focus on the positive. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, can you hear me? Caller?
Yes.
How you doing?
Hey. I'm fine.
You have a question?
Yes, Dr. Griggs.
Yeah, Professor Griggs, uh-huh.
Hey, this Sharani Williams, I used to be a student. I just wanted to touch on, you said...
Turn your TV down.
That people, when you say you taking this class, they be like, why you taking that?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I'm telling you, like, literally, me and my mother both learned from your class. Like, I brought the books and passed them to her, and one chapter you get in the book, it was like lies and manipulation. That's all part of the propaganda, is that people, they want you to perceive these thoughts about learning about your culture and learning who you are. They want to see that in a negative light when it's really positive. And I just thank you for bringing that to the light, and you taught me so much.
Thank you.
And that's all I wanted to say. And I'm just going to come sit in one of your classes. I ain't a student no more, but I just want to come see you one day, man.
Hey, anytime. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, take care. One of my students, which there are thousands of them out there at this point. I'm not an old man, but I've been teaching for quite some time, sharing some of the history and contributions of black people, and it has transformed minds right before your eyes. Because to a great extent, the success or lack thereof come down to 2 basic things: how much positive stuff you know about yourself, or how much negative stuff you know about yourself. Which should be common sense. But think about this. When we go through the exercise of teaching our history, our culture in our classroom, we're giving our people the ideas and the information and the contributions by the people who love them. And none of our folks who loved us told us to call each other these names, told us to be disrespectful to our elders, taught us to be wayward. No, that doesn't come from our brain trust. That comes from the people who fought against our brain trust. That's why Black history is just not a celebration of who we are. It's our way of coming to terms with how we should conduct ourselves, reclaiming back our minds, reclaiming back our social discourse, how we should spend, so it deals with economics. It gives us a political vision, a different philosophy about life. Because now I understand who I am, and once I understand who I am, I'll act accordingly. I'll become that thing. I'll think the way I'm supposed to. It helps a person be a better father. It helps a man be a better son. The whole 9. You look at this world totally different because you're filled with love. And all the studies out there tell us that when black students learn about themselves, they're happier students. They're more productive students. Let me give you an example. Back when Jennifer Granholm, and I think I mentioned this on the show before, she had some experts come and look at DPS schools. And she wanted to see how she can improve the scores, the academic scores at DPS. So these experts came and they looked at DPS schools and they brought their recommendations back to Jennifer Granholm. And the recommendation said if you expand the African Studies program, then those kids' scores would increase. The behavior of those children would be different. The outcomes would be different. We would have better children, more positive thinking children, more respectful children. But these are studies across the board. It's not just one. The AIM study, the Arizona Instrument Measurement Standards study, looked at high school kids who received at least, they had at least one Black Studies class. They looked at children who had at least one class about themselves compared to other children who never had a class about themselves. And they noticed that the children who had classes about themselves, math scores at the end when they graduated almost doubled, their reading scores almost doubled, and their writing scores almost doubled. The truth is that what most of us have been running away from is the things that could heal and remedy a lot of the problems that we have. It's the information about ourselves. That's why, regardless of time frame or generation or religion, it's one thing that all of these exceptional leaders that we have produced all have in common. They had knowledge about themselves. From Marcus Garvey to Elijah Muhammad to Dr. Martin Luther King to Malcolm X to Huey Newton to Obama, President Obama, to Minister Farrakhan, all of them, one thing ties all of those folks together, and that is the knowledge of self. It makes us different. And to a great extent, this is why folks have been playing with our education, depriving us of the things that we should know, and spent countless time and energy hiding this truth. So on that note, I'm going to go to the caller on the line. Hello, caller. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How you doing today, brother?
I'm okay. Welcome to Feedback.
Man, you're 110% correct.
Thank you.
A lot of people don't know that, when these other people came into our country, they took you out of a way of life and introduced a whole new way of life for you. Mm-hmm. This is in all the countries where they're invading. The only thing bad about and sad about what they introduced was damaging to the environment. I'm into ancient Black history, man. Right now I'm reading a book called The Pale Fox. This is about the Dogon. Mm-hmm. And these two people who went over and interviewed Dogon in the 30s. And what the Dogon is basically saying is this sacrifice for the life of people took place before man set foot on earth. That's the faith I'm into now, that the sacrifice, Immaculate Conception, the virgin birth, the resurrection took place before man set foot on earth, according to their faith and according to what I believe. But it's sad how Black people, knowing having this knowledge now, that all their countries were invaded, and somebody else's system was forced upon them. It's a system they weren't used to living. So in a sense, we are all sick with this new system. Everybody want to talk and brag about the things Black done in America and never look back at all the magnificent things we done prior to America. And then I heard some people come on and host the show talking about, well, Kurt, you always talking about negativity. It hasn't dawned on them yet that Black people's lives in America for the whole time since the inception of America has been negative. Let me just think about that. From the first time you've been here up until today has been negative. There's nothing positive in it except for the things that you created in it. Everything else is negative. Everything positive about Black people is prior to meeting others, coming in contact with others. And I've been on this a series of information about brothers, man, and I realized, man, these brothers had clocked the heavens. They created this thing called a 26,000-year astrological clock, man. They had clocked the heavens. They knew about the 8 solar zones that actually turns the earth. They knew about the speed of the earth. They had mapped the whole world. They had mapped all the land. And so, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that before we come in contact with others, everything beneficial to mankind has already been done. The things added are destructive to this planet. Man, I looked at a picture of Earth from outer space, man. You can no longer even see the shape of the planet from all the debris and satellites that's been shot up in space. You can't even see the shape of the planet anymore. They have polluted all of the water. They're cutting down all the trees. Ice sheets are breaking off from the Arctic. The what do you call it, that zone that's over the earth that's changed and affect the weather. Things they do affect the gravitational pull, the magnetics of the earth. They actually are destroying the planet.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying?
That's a
In
different
other words,
culture.
the thing that they produce and putting out there is costing us our water quality and our air quality.
Yeah, no doubt.
We're on our way to total destruction, man. They have turned this planet into a total wasteland.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say nothing negative about the people, but when you really look back on the whole scenario, brothers was the caretakers of this earth. And they were running it at peak efficiency until others came along. So the only thing they had to add to it is their fanatic mass,
Right.
which cost us water and air quality.
Now, let me
I
share
can't
something,
believe
Kirk.
I'm looking over at these other countries, man. These people are wearing masks to go to the store.
Now, Kirk, let me share something with you. As an educator, right, and I commend you for doing your studies, right? The problem that we have, we can get our people back on course if we taught this truth. I started this program off talking about E. Franklin Frazier and the bourgeoisie, the black bourgeoisie. We have too many people who are invested in the crumbs that we're getting from this man's table. And we know there's some truth out here, but we stand at these schools, we're principals at these schools, we're teachers at these schools, and we put our mothers' and our fathers' contributions on the back burner. And if we continue to do that, the world will be and continue to go the way that you just expressed. But some of us have to take a stand. Some of us have to spread this truth and change the direction, first and foremost, of our families and of our community by sharing this truth. And that's the key to us being successful. That's the difference of an outcome with a human being. It depends on what information they're operating off of. If we continue to operate off of his, we'll have the type of world that you describe. If we operate off the information of our fathers before us, we'll have the type of world that our mothers and fathers wanted us to have. So that's the decision.
You know,
I
a
think,
lot of people
and
call in,
I think
and they
Shakespeare
call
said
in,
it.
and they basically,
I think Shakespeare said it best: to be or not to be. We either gonna be us or we're not gonna be.
that's the problem. We're not being who we are. We're seeking to be what others are. And everybody want to talk about a solution. I don't have any problem with what everybody else have to contribute. But we must become independent of others. This is what they're doing in the African country now, especially, let's see, it's the one where President Nadu is in. He's in Rwanda, I believe it is. He's asking these Europeans, please leave. We appreciate what you've done for us so far, man, but we can handle things ourselves. We no longer need you here because all you've done here is raped our country.
Yeah.
You understand? And you made us dependent upon you. That's what's wrong with us in the city of Detroit. We right now dependent on all the Arab gas stations and grocery stores.
Everybody else.
And there's only one way out of that scenario.
Yeah, to be independent. Okay, Kirk, I appreciate your
Hey,
call.
thank
I got
you.
some more calls I got to
Thanks for
get
taking my
to. I got some more calls I got to get to, but I appreciate you, brother. Hello, welcome to Feedback. Can you hear me?
Hello, welcome to Feedback. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes, I can.
Yes, I'm sorry. You may have even already addressed this. I just wanted to ask a question. What is it about our people that accepts all of this from the European societies that the other cultures do not? What is it about us that accepts everything that they shove at us as right, making our way wrong? What is that? Do you as an educator, I'm asking you.
Okay, you might want to turn your TV down a little bit. I hear your echo in the back.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, I don't think it's uniquely to just us. I think you have various levels of white supremacy that have been internalized by people all over the planet. But when you're talking about just African American people here, well, we were socially engineered. So unlike any other people, we were completely stripped down. No language. We couldn't practice our philosophy or know it. Our psychology, our tradition, completely reduced. Sociologists say we are the world's greatest socially engineered product, where you take millions of people and you change them from what they were to something new to the benefit of someone else. Now, other people are affected too, just not to that degree. For example, like in China, they say right now, the Chinese psychiatrists say that the Chinese girl no longer wants to play with the Chinese doll, that now they don't like the way their eyes are looking. Now the #1 surgery in China is to get the Western-looking eyes. But China still has a lot of its culture still intact. But they have been manipulated to believe in some of the beauty standards that the Western world has imposed upon them. Because Western society, cinematography and movies spread around the world before the rest of the world even began recording anything. So they have been bombarded with these images of Western standards of beauty and what have you, that everyone from black Americans to Chinese Americans to the #1 Western nose surgery is coming out of Iran, where the Iranian women want noses like white women. So everybody has been affected because white supremacy is global, but we were really detrimented. It was detrimental for us because we were stripped and we were not able to retain much of any of our culture like other groups were. I hope that helped. You still there, caller? Okay. Hope that answered your question. Okay, well, I think I mentioned most of folks to get you guys started. I think I left off with Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben has about 50 books out there. And the key to understanding a lot of these problems that we have is actually reading from our perspective, from our scholars, because most of them have written so much addressing our issues, but we're not really reading these things. From Dr. Naim Akbar, his piece on miseducation and training, where he looked at how we're actually being trained to do certain things and not really being educated. Most of the questions that you might have, most of our scholars, I can't really think of any of them that haven't dealt with it to some degree. It's been roughly 100 years now where black people in America, it's the first time we got to really truly look at our history. And I would say really, to be realistically, it's been probably about 70 years to the black people got access to all levels of education from the 70s up until this particular time. But we had scholars who were writing this stuff in the early 1900s. Many were privileged. Some didn't come from this country. Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson were privileged to be able to get an education at that time early on. People like George G.M. James, who I mentioned, was from Guyana. C.L.R. James, who was a prolific writer, was from Trinidad. So a lot of folks who had unique backgrounds, like Dr. Ben, who was born in Ethiopia. Some of them had some more privilege than some people who were living in the rural South, who didn't get a chance to go to the universities and to study and to understand some of the things that were affecting black people. But it is complex, so it's not one book will answer everything for you. But the psychologists do deal with the psychological dynamics as it relates to black people. Then you have people like Claude Anderson. Dr. Claude Anderson, he looks at us from an economic, some of the economic dynamics and how that affect our spending habits affect us. So each one of these areas, our scholars deal with issues that affect us, from business to sociology to Kame Hope Felder, who looks at religion and its effects, to black folks. Like I mentioned, E. Franklin Frazier and so many others. I'm going to take this last call. Welcome to Feedback. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
You know, brother, I'd like to make the announcement, you know, that this Sunday in Chicago, Minister Louis Farrakhan will be speaking. And everybody should tune in to that lecture this Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can pull it up on NOI.com. It's a very timing message that all of us need to be listening in on. It will be broadcast all over the world, and we need to tune in on that. You know, brother, because the times are so serious for everybody that's on the planet right now. The time is so serious. You know, when we talk about us as a people, you know, it's on us to wake up and take our rightful place, because the world that we are experiencing is on its way out. And we are the cornerstones that God has selected to represent that new world that is about to take place. You hear these folks constantly talking about the new world order, the new world order. We better wake up, because, like I say, these people are talking about culling the population down to 2 to 3 billion people or whatever. And they're doing it through the 5Gs. They're doing it through the pharmaceuticals. They're doing it at hospitals. They're doing it through the foods that we're eating. They're doing it through the water. They're doing it through the air. They're doing it through the ways that we're constantly being bombarded with, constantly. But we better wait to what they're about to do in March, and that's that 5G. We need somebody to start educating the people on that 5G that's about to take place, because it's going to have a big effect on our bodies and our DNA. Just wanted to drop that off on you, brother. Love you, man.
Okay, man. I appreciate that. You take care.
You too.
Okay. Okay, we're coming down to the end of our show. I want to thank you guys for calling in, and thank all the listeners, and hopefully you guys gain a little bit more knowledge about black history and about some of our scholars. And Theo and Thabiti should be here next week. And so I appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Feedback. Hi, this is Theo Broughton,
And I am Thabiti Mpinga,
inviting you to join us each Monday at 9 a.m. for Feedback.
a positive image production by Hood Research.
Encourage others to tune in each Monday on
Comcast Detroit, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, watch WHPR TV Network anywhere.
and take us along with you. Feedback, feedback, feedback.